У нас осталась одна лекция недочитанной, и мы ее сейчас прочтем. Леонид Терушкин, Вадим Бродский, Москва, Россия. Searching, researching and publishing of the letters, diaries and memories of the Holocaust period and World War II. Presentation of new books.
Уважаемые господа, господин Терушкин, секунду извиниться. У нас пришел к нам, пришел к нам наш большой друг, участник прошлой конференции. Такой человек, который зажигает всю аудиторию, и посол Демократической Республики Австрии. Примем его с аплодисментами, и он скажет пару слов. И он нам принес книгу, а Балтер он расскажет об этой книге.
Ladies and gentlemen, please to allow me to say my few words in English, as both my Latvian and my Russian are not so convincing that I am in the capacity to address you in those languages. But thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much for having the opportunity to again being here. Thank you very much, Rabbi Bakahan. And all those people who organize this very important conference. I already took part last year. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it yesterday in the ambassadors panel because I was in Vienna meeting our federal president, who will visit Riga next year, and we had some preparatorial talks. Well, actually, there is not a lot. There is not a lot more that I can say that I already said last year. I think it's extremely important to hold events, to hold conferences like that one, because if we ask ourselves why it is still so important to uphold the memory for Holocaust and the victims of the Holocaust, then it's easy to find an answer. It is important to memorize the fact that it was for the first time in history of mankind that the government of one people made the decision to fully extinct another people and to put in every effort, technical efforts included, to put that into reality. And that it was, on the one hand, still keeps Holocaust as a one for all times example for what mankind is able to do to mankind. And I think it is also important to uphold memory in order to prevent things like that, because if we look around in the world, then we can see that maybe if it is not of the full horror that happened decades ago, but there are always alarming signals and signs that things like that might repeat, and therefore it's important to hold events like these, and especially to confront young people with the lectures we could draw from Holocaust. When it comes to memorizing these important topics, then of course all countries have different experiences, and the experience my country had was of course a very special one, and it was apart from those of other countries because Austria, as you all together know, is not in the same position as other countries which were occupied by the Nazis, where Austria was at that was part of the German Reich, and maybe in part of our history, of our modern history, we made it ourselves, my own country made it ourselves too easy to simply accommodate it in the status of a victim. And not to admit that also Austrians participated in the horrors of the Holocaust and in the crime of the Holocaust. If one searches for the reasons of that, then one has to go back into Austrian history, and one would see that of course, for those people who refounded the Republic of Austria after 1945, the theory of a victim, of course, was a quite true one, because on the one hand, the Republic of Austria as such, of course, was a victim of the Nazi regime because our independence ended with Nazi occupation. The the people themselves who refounded Austria, they themselves were victims of Nazi regime, most of them having been interned in Nazi concentration camps as political opponents. But by adopting this victim theory, this victim doctrine, which on the other hand was also very useful for regaining full independence after the Second World War, as Austria was also occupied like Germany by the four powers. Maybe by adopting this victims doctrine, one forgot to express clearly that while Austria as a country, while many Austrians had been victims, of course they also were perpetrators. Of course there also were Austrians who participated in Nazi crimes and very prominently participated in Nazi crimes. And it took up to the 70s, to the 80s. Maybe you remember the debate about our former federal president Waldheim, which was a painful debate at times that brought Austria to a state where we said, we also have to take responsibility for the crimes committed by Austrians, not acting in the quality of Austria of a state, but as Austrians, as being part of this horrible machinery that committed that unprecedented crime in the history of mankind. And I think with a new generation, also a new political generations from the 80s up, Austria has done a lot. Meanwhile, the memorizing of Holocaust is a firm part of our school schedule. The book I handed over to Rabbi Bar Kahan, for example, is about what is done on the memorial site of Mauthausen concentration camp close to Linz, which was one of the most horrible places, or actually the most horrible place of Holocaust being perpetrated in Austria. We do every year since then, we do hold a day of memory, official state mourning in Mauthausen on the 5th of May, which was the day when Mauthausen camp was liberated by US forces, where the whole government and also the federal president Fischer participated. And having mentioned this, I would like to end with a phrase that President Fischer put when on the 13th of March we remembered the 75th anniversary, so to say, of the so-called Anschluss, which was greeted by a considerable number of Austrians at that time with joy. Not all of Austrians, but a considerable number of Austrians greeted the Anschluss with joy, but with the perspective from knowing what horrible things happened afterwards, we only can say that this was a day of shame for Austria, and a day which obliges us to uphold the memory of Holocaust and the memory first and foremost of the victims, and also the memory of those people, also my own country lost, who rendered such enormous services to our country as the Jewish community did. We have to keep that in mind. Never again. That's the motto for the future, and we can only implement that in reality if we uphold memory. In this regard, in this respect, I would again like to thank you for the invitation, wish you a good conference, fruitful conference, and I look forward to participating in discussions. Thank you very much.